So good evening, everyone. Myself, Vandana, the National Youth President for the Research of Wiki Water Resource Council, welcome you all to this Monday Munching Musing with Women for Water. This is an initiative of the Eco Development and Research Cell, a not-for-profit initiative of the Environmental Design Consultants of Ahmedabad. This is happening with support of Water Resource Council of the Women Indian Chamber of Commerce and Industry, that is the Wiki WRC, and in collaboration for W4W Foundation. And our media partner for this particular event is Counterview. I'm joined today with Mansi, who's the National Wiki Water Resource Council President. We are also glad to start this conversation named Monday Munching Musing, which we are colloquially referring to as Blue Lips, as you can see the logo in the backdrop. Among us, we are basically trying to share the worries, the wisdom by the women, for the women, and typically of the women in the water sector. We are hoping that this conversation would be more like a masterclass where we can learn from the experiences live as shared by the speaker. Today, we are here to listen and know more about Mriganka, who is the founder, Mriganka Saxena, who is the founding partner of Habitat Tectonics Architecture and Urbanism, a Delhi-based architecture and urban design studio. And to add more to it, you are also our National Council member for planning at Wiki. So welcome to you, Mriganka. Just to briefly introduce our audience who Mriganka is, she's been working at the interface of the planning, policy, and urban strategy for over 2 decades. She has also been a TED speaker and has been focused at enabling urban transformation in the domain of water and urban development in India. So, heartiest welcome to you once again, Mriganka.
Thank you so much, Vandana.
In this conversation, we are going to get started by actually asking you, in terms of how did you really get into the sector? Was it your background in terms of education, or was there an inspiration that you followed? So could you just take us through your journey of 2 decades?
Sure. So I'm trained as an architect and an urban designer, and worked my initial first sort of 7-8 years of professional life was in the UK, where water was never separated from the urban development process. Right, it was one, all resources, all infrastructure, it was one. So when we didn't even think twice about that we will have to look at water. That's how we were trained as urban designers, urban planners. Even from a policy perspective, I worked at the interface of policy there as well, and even then it was one holistic approach to sustainable development. Forward about 8 years and then landed back in India and started working in the domain of planning policy in core urban development and mobility, actually. So did a lot of work in the domain of TOD. And every time we would talk about development, water would tend to get left behind. No matter how hard we tried, we were told, it's not your domain. You're an urban designer, you're an urban planner, stick to that. The infrastructure guys will come and look after water, right? So that's always been the approach. Very frankly, it was almost by chance that I got into the water space. There was an amazing opportunity to lead a project for restoring all the drains and water bodies in the NCT of Delhi, which was being led by the Delhi Jal Board. And they were looking for a team leader and an urban strategist to lead this process. And that's how I interviewed. I was really lucky to get the job. And it was a full-time in-house consultant within the DJB, for which I left my practice HTAU for over 2 years. And what was good was that I was not defined by a TOR, right? So that is another sort of pet peeve of mine, to be defined by badly written TORs. So this gave me, because it was a full-time in-house, consultancy, it gave me the bandwidth and the leeway and the freedom to design the project myself, right? And of course, we had brilliant leadership. The then CEO and the member water then were very proactive, and we were actually behind this initiative. So there, literally, we worked with engineers on ground, surveyed all the water bodies, drains, walked everywhere, built the team together. It was brilliant that we had a team of 8 young professionals from all fields. We had hydrological engineers, we had landscape architects, urban designers, urban planners, right? civil engineers, all of us in a team working together trying to crack this problem. And nobody had really figured it out at the scale of the city, right?
Okay.
So that process was fascinating. And we put in place, the entire, the approach and methodology, the SOPs we learned on the ground, we made our learning sort of public. And so it's been fascinating. That's how I got into the sort of water domain full on. I mean, water has always been part of our design consultancy as HTAU, but
Yeah.
purely water was the transition.
Okay. So good to hear that you have, already tasted the water from different aspects.
Yes.
I would put it that
Yes.
way.
Yes.
Just trying to visualize that, because you are dealing with multiple issues related to water, how would your typical day would look like? You are also looking into your designing project. You're also trying to build
Yeah.
some policy advocacy, as we were earlier just
Yes.
discussing before this conversation started. And you're also working at the grassroots, trying to really go be on the field. So how does your, typical work day look like? Can you just take us through that?
Sure. So, unfortunately or fortunately, I don't know, the different scales have happened over different times, right?
Okay.
So, say for example, the Delhi experience was essentially looking at creating the administrative ecosystem, getting people empaneled, making sure collecting data, putting in place mechanisms for how data will be collected, putting out the strategy. So that was sort of 12-hour days at the Delhi Jal board, trying to crack how we could do this, trying to align the right people on the job, find the right engineers in the irrigation and flood control department who were the implementing agencies, sort of almost capacity building without really saying so, like building capacity inwards within the department to say, this is how you go about doing it.
Okay.
And from that was then. In the policy domain, the days are very different, right? You are not on the field, not many doors open, right? Because nobody really wants to deal with the complexity of bringing about statutory change. So,
Yeah.
right? So while doors were shut, then also because people didn't want to restore water bodies, but at least we could push our way because there was a mandate, right? In a policy domain, I've realized over the last sort of 4 years where I've been trying to do this, it's a very difficult conversation to have, because it's complex, because it's if you want to really bring about statutory change and create the mandate for integrated urban water management, like you and I understand it, looking at water as one closed loop system, not piped and natural water resources as two separate entities, but looking at it as one entity and managing water sustainably. If we have to bring about the regulatory and statutory change, we need to do that top down, from the national water policy down to municipal functions, the list of municipal functions in the municipal acts. Now that ecosystem, which we fanned out and we've actually put it out there, is not very difficult. It's not rocket science, right? But it's extremely complex, and the system is extremely lethargic, and it's changing the status quo. And that's the inertia that I'm currently fighting. If it's a matter of, maybe it's a matter of a year or so, right? So for example, 10 years ago, when you would fight about wanting cycle tracks, nobody would want to listen, but now everybody is talking about cycle tracks. It's still difficult to implement, but at least you're not fighting at the basic level. Here the fight is at the basic level to bring about statutory change, I think, holistic statutory change. So I think once we overcome that inertia, it's going to get better. But yeah, so in my day, when it comes to policy, quite a few closed doors on my face, frankly, at the moment. So that's what the day looks like. But I'm not getting disheartened by those doors being shut. So let's see, fingers crossed.
No, absolutely delighted to hear you trying, on different fronts. And I think Mansi is also on the similar lines, trying on different fronts to bring a little bit of change. So this is the right time to bring Mansi into the conversation. Over to you, Mansi.
Oh, thank you. I was so happily listening to both you girls because it's really candid. And it's also good to meet someone who has a background in architecture and urban design and has transcended to, talk about water, thinking that it is part of the urban development.
Absolutely.
So I think we have more common things to discuss. However, because the focus of the discussion here is more on the gender and women, I will try to keep my queries to you towards that, because
Sure.
we can go endless discussing water as well as discussing urban development, but
Sure.
I think at some other platforms. So
Of course.
first of all, thank you, Mriganka, for joining us today. Because you mentioned about your experience working in the UK and then coming and also working in the mainstream, I will say sector, urban sector, where water was your responsibility and a key issue to work around, and you had a good taste of, as you mentioned, on the ground or municipal level. At the same time, you also mentioned that the need for national, policies to be really percolating to the ground. I want to understand from you, when you were doing capacity development and also strategizing around water subject, how was the gender composition at the work environment, and how was the acceptance or accommodation in terms of women talking and, making some crucial decisions?
Sure. It hasn't been easy. So from a public sector perspective, I mean, any other public sector agency, the women composition is absolutely minimal, right? So, and I was working at a utility company. Delhi Jal Board is a utility company, right? So essentially, I would say 98% male, right? Decision makers, 100% male, or maybe 99.5% male. I do remember a senior lady there. But what was interesting was it really came down to personal beliefs and personal, systems. So I cannot generalize that, the engineering team was more averse or was more open. It was down to personal relationships. There were some brilliant engineers on the team who worked extremely well with whoever on the team was. So they would make brilliant partners in the initiative. It didn't care if it was a woman, giving them recommendations or suggesting something. On the other hand, equally, there was the other lot of people who would openly be hostile because a woman was walking into the room. I have heard things which have been said, which says, why don't you walk in and we'll see what a woman can do? These have been openly said to me. Yeah, in Hindi, of course. Aaye, madam, dekhte hain kya kar payenge aap. So in those things, it's best not to let it affect you. Just ignore it and move on, because it's just sort of white noise, when you're trying to do so much more. But and what was interesting was that the design team, the consultant team, was pretty much 50-50, right? Because they were the technical people who were coming in to do something. So planners, landscape architects, etc., or maybe 40-60. So but at least it was a more balanced.
There was a good presence.
It was a balanced mix. Even higher level, in key meetings with decision makers, at the highest office in the city, there would be a certain level of disdain and disregard because a woman was speaking. So it does happen. It does happen, but we've got used to working, working in the public sector for so long. You just have to deal with it.
Absolutely. I mean, I think we face it every now and then. And I think we are now tuned to that music of seeing more men around. But yes, you rightly mentioned, when it comes to particularly our field like urban design, landscape and architecture, women do have a fair share of presence. But I would like to also then invite you later to my other study on women in architecture, where actually it sounds like this, but it is not really like this. But probably Delhi also has a very different, Delhi, Ahmedabad, Mumbai, Bangalore. These are different,
absolutely,
different situations.
Absolutely.
It goes to water as well, when you see different situation in terms of who is listening and who is talking, So bringing back the whole conversation of being women in the water sector and your first-hand experience there and all, I would like to go a little bit personal, if you don't mind. But being woman also means that taking care of the house and family, and also, of course, nowadays we do not get discount of doing that. Instead, we put ourselves in that whole situation of being the super woman. So I would like to know Mriganka, the superwoman, little bit more. To understand how you are doing all of these things together. I mean, it's up to you how much you would like to share.
Sure.
But every woman goes through this kind of situation, irrespective of marital status, irrespective of age, irrespective of all kinds of health issues up and down, and liabilities and all. So just curious, because we are celebrating, and we want to also really bring this to notice that having a family and doing bit about family is equally an important and professional work than doing the professional work, So and of course we are not seeking discount for it, but then we all have 24 hours. If we do this, there is an opportunity cost, So how are you doing all of this as a superwoman?
Okay. It's a constant jugglery, Mansi. Seriously, it's constant jugglery. So there are times in the morning I would wake up and, you like have a conversation in your head saying, how many balls am I juggling today, right? So is it 10 or 12? How many have I dropped? If I've dropped about half, I'm all right. If I've dropped 90%, then I'm in problem, right? So that's literally how it is. So, and you choose the balls you want to drop. And it's not easy. I mean, jokes apart, it's not easy. It's with a brilliant ecosystem that I have, and an extremely supporting husband, and a wonderfully sort of non-problematic child who's extremely open and loves the fact that his mom works. In spite of all that, on a day-to-day basis, it's a struggle, more so created in our own heads, I feel.
Yes, I guess. Right? So that's why we have to get over this superwoman syndrome.
Yes, absolutely. And half the time the issue comes with, trying not to feel guilty for not having done 10 other things. And, ignoring a few things for others, and in somewhere out there also somehow trying to, take some time out for yourself, which never really happens, maybe happens 10% of the time. But I just feel that I don't think there is ever a mantra to solve this. It's a very personal thing. Each one deals with it differently. Each one deals with it differently on different days. Some days you can just get on with everything and you're a happy soul, and 2 days down the line, on the same things, you would come crumbling down because you just haven't managed it. So it's been fascinating, but I just feel that it's tough. It's tough to manage everything without, letting something give. Something has to give. Otherwise, just not humanly possible to manage everything, on a daily basis.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is also there in other genders as well, but because our focus is on women issues, we are focusing there. But I'm sure every individual on a daily basis is going through this whole, daily management as well as long time life management and work management.
I think it's the same. I mean, I see my husband equally sort of, trying to figure things out and manage it. So maybe we are more privileged that we can get out there and we have a choice to work in a domain that we enjoy working, and still, even create a support system so that we can go out and work. And I think there are a majority of the women in our country don't have that luxury to even do that. So I think we are really privileged to be able to manage all this ourselves. And sometimes you feel silly complaining, even because, you've got the ecosystem going and you can create the ecosystem. But I know there are many who just don't have a choice. So,
absolutely. That brings me to an important question, which was our natural question after the previous one, is you have also realized it, and you did mention in your early part of this conversation that there were 9.5% male colleagues, and all. I'm sure this percentage increases when you go on the ground if we do not count the labor forces. you know. But just to understand from you, as you reckon that there are not many women leaders, especially in the water sector, you know. And if they exist, as you see from the Wiki's Water Resource Council, we are really trying to build a network. We also realize that the women professionals who are there are not much acknowledged across the fraternity. And a classic example is those manels sitting and deciding things, whether it is in the boardroom or whether it is on these webinars and all those kind of things. But why do you think that we or women in water are really not getting the due acknowledgement and appreciation in the water sector?
It's actually, I think it's to do with the sector. Urban development and urban planning as a sector is still more balanced, I feel. Right.
Okay.
So
I will contest that with you some other time.
In different phases. So I mean, if I were to look at it from a
when you're comparing with the water,
with the water sector, right? So and I'm also comparing it across stages. So from a planning and design stage down to implementation, I think the gender balance changes considerably.
Yes.
Right. So in the planning and design stage, when it comes to urban planning and design, you would still find a lot of women, right? A lot. I mean, today, there's multiple projects that we're working on. It's usually a single man who's sitting in a room of 20 women, right? So that
is another discussion, huh? Why? Because most men bosses, they prefer women subordinates.
No, these are leaders in their own right.
You look at the university compositions also, all the head of the institution, department, vice chancellor, all will be men, but the number of teachers, women, and management staff, there will be more women. You know, so these are now common compositions. So I will say this is a transition.
Of course.
Yes, but then if we talk about the leadership, why do you think we are still lacking in that acknowledgement and appreciation, or is it just this transition we are talking about?
So I think things have improved, but we have a really, really long way to go. In terms of leadership, I think there is a key divide between the public and the private sector as well. So in the public sector, if you're looking at, hardcore implementing agencies or even planning agencies, the number of the recruiting policies themselves are a starting point, right? So when you're looking at sort of junior engineers joining a Delhi Jal board or a municipal corporation or a PWD, any agency that might be, there isn't a minimum percentage of women engineers that they need. They are the people who are going up the ranks, right? So if you don't have the cadre at the bottom, intake mein nahi hai. So if the bottom of the pyramid doesn't have it, as you go down, you will never find it. You will never find
because then there is a equal gender equality and then competition. But then if there are lesser women at the bottom,
exactly. So
a very good point, huh?
It's very important because it's all sort of promotion led the way it is. You do so many years, you go from junior to senior, executive engineer, then member water, whatever, chief engineer. So you will never find a member water or a member whatever, town planning, whatever, who's a woman, because the intake at that level, that lady has never gone through the ranks to reach that level. Right. So which is a critical issue. It also comes down to the
but in the lower ranks, do you mean less women are applying because it has field work, or because there are lesser women getting educated in the sector? Or
so I think in the technical fields, again, if you're looking at engineers, etc., in the technical fields, I think there is also I don't think there is a precedent of many women joining these technical fields. So when it comes to government jobs, women from the families are encouraged to take up, secretarial positions. Permanent job, you'll be happy. There is a sense of permanence, but take up a secretarial job. It's also because of the gender bias that is there. I think a woman would almost find it a challenge to, in a batch of 50 junior engineers joining any agency, if there are 2 women, it's not the most comfortable environment to get into. right? If there hasn't been an enabling sort of platform that the agency has created.
Okay, it's both. I mean, intake, and
both.
even if once taken, then also, I mean, I do
It's
remember
not
20 years
yeah.
ago at going to an office where the toilets were even not really
Absolutely.
comfortable for women folks to join the office, you know.
Yeah,
then
I faced that myself when I was working as a full-time consultant in the Delhi Development Authority. I was pregnant, and it was a massive issue, sort of massive hygiene issue when it came to toilets there. So we had to get it sorted.
One of the enabling environment, but of course, I mean, the way conversation goes on in the office, the way you know, little clusters form in the office, the friends are forming in the office, all these things add to the enabling environment for women to feel comfortable in an organization.
Absolutely.
But you made a very valid point, that if women are not getting recruited at the junior ranks, then the probability of they rising to the leading ranks, it gets very slim.
Absolutely.
And so that brings me to two questions. If this the chances of getting to the higher position is slimmer, do you see lateral entries for higher position an option? But it's a very light question from my end because it is rare. But then how do we really increase women joining the junior ranks, you know, because if they want to compete at par at some point in time, you know, like in an organization, if the junior ranks have 30-70, 40-60, 50-50 at some point in time, do you think it will then have a fair chance of women going to the top ranks?
I think so. I think the bias and the disadvantage won't go away immediately, but the fact immediately, but to be able to create that that recruiting policy that enables them to join, that's just one thing, I think, right? Getting them to join, and then creating the environment that they are not put at a disadvantage when it comes to going up the ranks. You know,
women have to go through more examinations to go to up the rank than men. I mean, they are, that's also a very common
I'm not phenomenon. Sure. I'm not sure what the requirements for different agencies are for promotion, but you know, the pyramid becomes narrower at the top. So, you know, who gets selected and who doesn't, and that's the point, right? In an agency which is, you know, predominantly male, it is very difficult.
So the committee is also going to be male to decide.
Yeah, and it's very difficult to network, to be able to put your point across, to be able to somebody who's extremely technically skilled, right, but may not be very confident, right, will not be able to put their point across because it's such a male-dominated environment, right? So that also comes when I was talking about the idea of being privileged. You know, you and I are privileged enough to stand on our feet, stand our ground, and make a point, right? But in many cases, women may choose not to do that. So they go unheard while they might have, you know, they might be fully talented and more so than, you know, the others in the room. But so the environment, I think, is extremely important to let women flourish in, you know, whichever domain that they are in.
But that also means that women also have to really make that extra effort, you know, apart from talking about creating an enabling environment, and especially when few women reach those stages, they have additional responsibility to ensure that more women are really facilitated for taking up more leadership roles. So how do you think we can, as a network, can bring a difference in the water sector, especially for women? And when I'm talking about women, I'm really keen on leadership and decision-making positions, because we will often notice that actually in all the managerial and administrative work, you may find a lot of women. If I get into university system, you will find a lot of women. I also have had a chance to notice some university compositions where they say equal number of men and women stuff. But then when you look into the grains of it, you find who is not there in the leadership, and then the women are not privileged, or I will say not getting the opportunity. So what do you think we can do as a network to improve the women leadership?
I think the leadership comes down to, again, the ecosystem. I don't think we can bring about a change instantly. I think it's about, and I think if we want this change to be sustainable, it's about bringing about a systemic change, a change that lasts. Even if it's a small systemic change, I think that's more important to be done than, make one or two sort of small changes that way. I think capacity sensitization, I think, is more than capacity building. Sensitization is very important. Sensitization both ways. Putting in place basic mandatory requirements, right? And I'm sure it's out there saying, this is the basic standard of facilities, amenities, etc. You need to have a creche, or you need to have, these kinds of working environments in all public agencies, in all government offices. And, these large government offices might have one headquarter which meets certain requirements, but all the zonal offices, all the tiny local offices. So, these agencies are massive when it comes to office infrastructure, if I can call it that. The tiniest ones, will not have a feeding room for women, won't have a changing room for kids, etc. So basic things like that is something that can be pushed, almost getting down to a monitoring framework as well. Can Wiki go and check? Can Wiki go and check the top 10, public agencies in their own cities and do a little assessment, getting the data out there. If people know it's not there, in many cases, maybe the top man or the top woman leading the agency, most likely a top man leading that public sector agency, may not even be aware of what's happening because he has so many other, policy level things to deal with. But if an audit of some sort is done, he knows, 90% of my offices in, all the zones are not meeting these basic requirements. He has something to work with. I think right now there is no data either. So these kinds of quantifiable, assessments, I think will become really handy. And they are spread across the country. So if there is a standard format, each one of us in our own cities can go and say, these agencies, can we please help you do this? Can you assess what amenities do you have? Basic things like that, I think, are very important to do. And of course, the other side of the spectrum is actually check. I don't know how Wiki can do this, but it's important to check where the graduating class of different streams, might be MBAs, might be engineers, might be, hotel management specialists, get data from these institutes to figure out where do the young women graduates go? What kind of jobs do they go for? Only if we start getting data for that, right, will we know whether they are not going out of choice, right, or they are being discriminated against. It might be, I've seen many architects who choose not to work after being qualified, right, for personal reasons, for family reasons, family pressures, whatever that might be. That is a different, ball game altogether, where we can't get into, bringing about change at a family level, right? But
then the change is not coming.
Yeah, so it's it's happening across all sectors, but just getting information of why there are women not going into certain agencies or certain sectors, right? If women are not opting for a job, we can't blame that a man is leading that agency, right?
Absolutely.
So we need to check. We can't keep saying, there's not a woman leader, but maybe nobody applied. Right?
Absolutely. Yeah, because nowadays in many job opportunities, it is written women are encouraged to apply.
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, we see that. You do mention about enabling environment, and you were focusing more on, women's physical requirements. I mean, prenatal, postnatal, and other when the child is grown up and all. So we still have those social cultural situations where women are obliged to take care of the children,
Absolutely.
whether it is written or unwritten rule.
Yeah. It's biological.
It is biological as well. But then the acceptance of the society for a woman professional who is, either pregnant or have a child, is also a taboo in our society.
Yeah.
Apart from the fact that the social cultural aspect of masculinity in the water sector, as you were also giving a very one-liner example, आओ देखें आप भी क्या कर सकते हैं, है ना, something like so that is a deep-rooted thing, But then when we are talking about this physical thing, I think these things can be still met, although we have not met those aspects. Facilitating women for their physical requirements, whether it is sanitation and hygiene, whether it is child care, whether it is their own health issues, which are very, very regular in case of women, although there are medical leaves and all. But then how do we really change these social cultural biases, whether a woman can do this or not? And I feel that there are some strings tied to the schooling and the parenting at home.
Absolutely.
So I'm just curious, as an individual woman, how can I bring those changes in the society?
I think a lot of that comes, you're absolutely right, a lot of that comes from how you're brought up in the house, how your mother brings you up, right?
Again, it's an onus on the woman, huh?
It does, because it's because how a mother treats the daughter and the son at home, right? That I think that if the mother is working in a framework of respect and equality in the house, that will automatically go down, right? It's not about the father giving respect, it's about the mother claiming respect in the house. I think that's what I'm saying. How the mother, deals within the house has a very sort of lasting impact on kids, I think. But it's a very personal, family to family sort of, thing. And a lot of it also boils down to education, schooling. But I think we can only influence the number of people we connect with on a personal basis. But to bring about a systemic change is, I think, literally going to happen over decades, I feel, in our country. Things are changing, but it's really deep-rooted. It's really, really deep-rooted.
Absolutely. So now you are doing quite a number of interesting projects. Maybe it's a good idea that you give just a brief overview of it.
Sure.
At the same time, tell us how do you envisage utilizing your current Wiki Water Resource Council national position to really bring more change or bring some reforms? What are your plans to bring reforms in women leadership in whatever region, in whatever sector? What are your plans? And at least in the coming 2 years or 5 years, it will be interesting to know. Thank you.
Sure. So what I realized after having worked in the Delhi Jal Board, we did a lot of sort of really, really good work, which was evidence-based, which was data-driven, which was, led from the ground. And we did pilots, and whatever learnings we had, we made them into SOPs, etc. The one thing that I realized was that all our, no matter how good our work was, we could not scale and we could not replicate. And that got me thinking, why are we not able to do that? And that's across sectors. We are very good at doing in the domain of urban development. I'm talking about water, infrastructure, everything, right? We are very good at doing pilots, and we are doing pilots extremely successfully, but we are in whichever sector we are not able to scale when it comes towards moving towards sustainability, right? And the main reason for the biggest barrier for that is statutory, regulatory, and institutional mechanisms and existing frameworks. Most of our policy regimes were created back in the 1960s, right? There were different needs. They were very robust for the time, but we've moved on considerably, right? So my sort of focus over the last few years is not really on projectization anymore, right? So I think there are way more skilled people out there, men and women, who can do brilliant designs, who can make a brilliant project, implement it beautifully, right? But they need people to enable them to work well, right? And I think that's where I see myself increasingly over the last sort of 7-8 years. I'm working on the other side. I'm no longer, a consultant doing a project, but I work on the other side, working with the public sector, trying to create that enabling ecosystem for these brilliant designers, architects, engineers to come and do their work and bring about urban transformation. In that larger ecosystem, the two things that I think are extremely, actually, it's generally 4 pillars, but 2 are more important. One is the policy framework, policy and regulatory framework, and the second is institutional mechanisms and institutional mandates. In the water domain, this is what I've been trying to do. I'm trying to create this enabling ecosystem to make integrated urban water management a mandate across the country, right? Looking at the national water policy, which is currently being revised, down to all the efforts of Ministry of Water Resources, JNNU, the Urban Jal Shakti Mission, and going down to state level water departments and municipalities. So that is the framework that I'm trying to push. And I think Wiki is the absolutely right platform to actually push that agenda, because it's a national platform, and it's a national platform of like-minded women who are wanting to bring about this change. And the women in the group come from all segments, right? So if I zoom out of that ecosystem, each one is playing an extremely important role in trying to make this transition in whichever space they are in. But the enabling environment might still be a deterrent if we have to scale, and we have to scale looking at the rates of urbanization we're looking at. So I am sort of in my mental space, I'm sort of done with pilots. I really want to make sure that the pilots can be scaled and this can become a norm rather than, oh, do we have a precedent? We should have precedents, right? That's how it should be. So that's really what it is. And while the framework is ready, the next thing that I think is extremely important is sensitization for the need for statutory change. And that is what before this conversation we were briefly discussing is I would want to focus on the next 2 years and actually use Wiki as a platform to do that. And the sensitization can happen at different scales, from the city level, state level, down to the national level. And that framework to say that gradually you need to start looking at your administrative structures. I mean, the way it is, cities are the biggest polluters and the biggest consumers of water.
Yes.
But the city is not in any of our statutory regimes. The city is not recognized as a planning unit for water.
No.
Right? It's just not recognized. So even if a city wants to do it, it cannot.
No.
Water is sort of divided in so many silos institutionally. Not one agency in the entire country is responsible for looking at or mandated to look at water in an integrated manner.
No.
If somebody tries to, they are stopped. It's not in your act. How the hell are you doing this?
Yes.
So, this is systemic change, and this is what is my agenda for the next 2 to 5 years, frankly. And I really hope I can do this. Really hope.
Because you talk about integrated water resource management, you also bring the discourse of complexity. And I can strongly relate that how women are more comfortable talking about complexity than linear solutions,
Absolutely.
To look at things. But we can again go on these discussions, but I have to bring back the focus on women. And I will actually stop here with my questions to you, because I think we have more interesting questions coming from Vandana. So thank you, Mriganka, for really being so frank in telling.
I hope I've not been too frank, but it's okay.
I mean, I think you have been just natural. So that's good for us. And that's what we are trying to convey to the future generations as well.